Hey guys, welcome. Today we shall be discussing some high-yield stuff from the endocrinology. We shall be doing it in some parts because it is not possible to cover the entire subject in one session. So let us see the first question. The first question is if a patient presents to you with midline neck mass which moves with deglutition or tongue protrusion. So this is a key word. So they are talking about, yes, you are right. They are talking about thyroglossal cyst. Now contrast this cyst with another cyst which is present which presents as a lateral neck mass, okay, which is anterior to sternocleidomastoid. So this is very important. The anterior word is very important. So it is the branchial cleft cyst. Now let us see. The left recurrent laryngeal nerve has longer course because of persistence of dash artery. So we all know that left recurrent laryngeal nerve arches through the ductus arteriosus and goes above. So it has a longer course. So ductus arteriosus, basically this question is asking that ductus arteriosus is derived from which structure. So the answer is left sixth artery. So as you all know that during the development of the arterial system of our body, there are six arches from the aorta. So if this is a dorsal aorta, there are dorsal aorta and there is a ventral aorta. So there are two dorsal aorta and a ventral aorta. So there are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 arches from the aorta which contributes to the various arteries of our body. So the persistence of the left sixth artery will lead to the formation of ductus arteriosus, and because of that left recurrent laryngeal nerve has longer course. Okay. Now a clinical vignette in which you have been given a patient of mitral stenosis. The patient is a known case of mitral stenosis and now the patient is presenting with hoarseness and dysphagia. Why? So the answer is left atrial enlargement. As you all know that in mitral stenosis there will be pressure build up behind the mitral valve, so the left atria will get enlarged. You also know that when you see the structure of heart, the left atria is the posterior most part. The left atria is the posterior most chamber. It is the posterior most chamber of heart. So it will enlarge and it will compress the recurrent laryngeal nerve and it will cause hoarseness. It will enlarge and it will compress esophagus. So it will cause dysphagia. It might enlarge and it might compress trachea as well, which might lead to dyspnea. Now this hoarseness which develops in mitral stenosis, this has been given a special name which is called Ortner's syndrome. Now I have taken this topic here because the recurrent laryngeal nerves are also associated closely with the thyroid gland. So while doing ligation of the superior thyroid artery, there is a chance of injury to the superior laryngeal nerve, and while ligating the inferior thyroid artery, there is a chance of injuring the recurrent laryngeal nerve. So I have taken the recurrent laryngeal nerve here. Now let us see the zones of adrenal gland. So all we know is there are three zones, that is we remember by mnemonic GFR, zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata and zona reticularis. So the main hormone from the zona glomerulosa is aldosterone. The main hormone from zona fasciculata is cortisol. And the main hormone from zona reticularis is DHEA, which is a androgen which further gets converted into testosterone and estrogen. Now what are the stimulant? What are the stimulant of these zones? So the main stimulus of zona glomerulosa, remember it is not ACTH, it is angiotensin 2. The main stimulant for both of this is ACTH. Now, here comes the clinical significance of this fact that zona glomerulosa, the main stimulant is angiotensin 2, it is not ACTH. Now, if we talk about primary adrenal insufficiency, then all of these zones will be affected and all these hormones will decrease. But if we talk about secondary adrenal insufficiency, it is due to ACTH deficiency. Okay, so in secondary adrenal insufficiency, zona glomerulosa will be spared because its main stimulant is angiotensin 2. That's why the sodium and potassium levels in secondary adrenal insufficiency will be only mildly affected or will not be affected at all. So this can be given to you in the form of a clinical vignette. Okay, so let us write here in primary adrenal insufficiency, the sodium level will decrease, potassium will decrease, glucose will decrease because cortisol is decreasing, BP will decrease, and ACTH obviously will increase. That will lead to hyperpigmentation. So primary adrenal insufficiency, the problem is with the adrenal gland. In secondary adrenal insufficiency, the problem is with the pituitary. So ACTH will decrease, obviously, but as I have told that zona glomerulosa will be spared because its main stimulant is angiotensin 2. That's why the levels, the RAS system, the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system is intact. That's why the level of sodium and potassium will be normal. Glucose will decrease because cortisol is decreasing as it is stimulated by ACTH. BP will also slightly decrease. Okay, but the features will be more severe in case of primary adrenal insufficiency. Now remember this fact: aldosterone is directly proportional to sodium and it is inversely proportional to potassium. So if there will be hyperkalemia, there will be increased secretion of aldosterone. Potassium is also a very strong stimulant for the aldosterone secretion. Potassium is also very strong stimulant for aldosterone secretion. So these are some important points associated with these zones. Now there is one clinical scenario that they give associate related to the craniopharyngioma. Craniopharyngioma generally presents in children. It is suprasellar in location. It might present with headache, bitemporal hemianopsia. It might present with hyperprolactinemia because it will compress the pituitary stalk. Okay, so as you know that dopamine is inhibitory to the secretion of prolactin, but when the stalk will be compressed, dopamine will decrease, and so the prolactin will go up. And it also present, it might present with diabetes insipidus. Okay, on imaging finding, we might find a cystic mass. We might also find a calcified lesion. So calcified lesion, if given in a clinical vignette in a child, okay, with these symptoms, then most probably they are talking about craniopharyngioma. And craniopharyngioma is derived from the remnants of Rattke's pouch. Okay. Now we'll see that suppose they give you clinical scenario like this, that a patient is on insulin therapy. Now the patient wants to participate in some sports activity. So what will you do with the dose of insulin? So here comes the concept of exercise induced increased insulin sensitivity. So what is the exact mechanism? As we all know that when the muscle contracts, there will be increase in the calcium in the sarcoplasm. Okay, so this calcium will cause increased recruitment of GLUT4 on the muscle surface. So there will be increased intake of glucose by the muscle. This is known as insulin independent recruitment of GLUT4, and this might cause hypoglycemia if the patient is taking insulin. So decrease the dose of insulin. Decrease dose of insulin in exercising patient. Now let us see another concept. If the female is present with secondary amenorrhea, or we can say galactorrhea. or we can say hyperprolactinemia. Which are the three tests which you need to be which needs to be done? So the first test is TSH. The second test is UPT or urine pregnancy test for pregnancy. And the third test is RFT for CKD. Now, TSH, as you all know, why do we do TSH? Because in hyper in hypothyroidism, in hypothyroidism, there will be increased TRH plus increased TSH. Okay, so TSH, TSH, TRH. Okay, so the TRH which is increased will lead to increased prolactin, and this might lead to infertility, amenorrhea, or galactorrhea. In CKD patients, the clearance of the prolactin is decreased. The clearance of the prolactin is decreased. In CKD patients, prolactin clearance is decreased. That's why there will be hyperprolactinemia. And pregnancy is obviously a cause of secondary amenorrhea, galactorrhea, or hyperprolactinemia. Now we'll see another concept, which is mechanism of insulin degradation and insulin resistance. So this is also frequently asked. So degranulation, I'm sorry, it's not degradation, it's degranulation. So this is also very interesting and very important. So on the beta cell, this is a beta cell. There is presence of GLUT2 receptors. GLUT2 receptors. So when the blood glucose will increase, the glucose will translocate inside the cells through these GLUT2 receptors. Glucose will undergo glycolysis and form ATP. Okay, glucose will undergo glycolysis and will form ATP. So the ATP ADP ratio will increase in ATP by ADP ratio. This will cause the closure of this potassium channel. So what happens in normal condition, in resting condition, the potassium continuously moves out of the cell. Okay, so positive charge is moving out of the cell. Now by increasing this ratio, okay, we will close this potassium channel. We will close this potassium channel. So the potassium won't be able to move outside, and this will cause increase in positive charge inside the cell, which will cause depolarization and release of insulin. Now insulin acts on its target cell by a tyrosine kinase receptor. So this tyrosine kinase will cause phosphorylation of the tyrosine residues of insulin response substrate 1. Okay, as the name suggests, it's sounding a bit more complicated, but it's not that complex if you understand the name itself. So the tyrosine kinase, okay, tyrosine kinase indicates that kinase means phosphorylation. Tyrosine means tyrosine residues. So this receptors will cause phosphorylation of tyrosine residues. If this is a tyrosine residue, it will get phosphorylated of the insulin response substrate. So in normal condition, there will be tyrosine phosphorylation. But if substances like glucagon, cortisol, epinephrine is increased, what they will cause? They will cause serine and threonine phosphorylation on this insulin receptor substrate. Okay, so this will cause insulin resistance. So abnormal or insulin resistance is due to serine or threonine phosphorylation. So this is very important to know. They ask it in the exams that the insulin resistance is due to which phosphorylation or the phosphorylation of which residue. So the answer is serine or threonine phosphorylation, right? Now let us see why Prader-Willi syndrome patients have obesity. So the simple answer is due to increase in ghrelin. Ghrelin is a hunger hormone. More the ghrelin, more you will feel hungry. More they will eat and they will become obese. Okay. Now this is a very interesting question. What are the leptin levels in obese patient? Now usually we will think that leptin is a satiety hormone. So the obese people don't have satiety. They eat continuously. So they should have a very low leptin levels, very low satiety hormone levels. But the answer is no. They actually have very high leptin levels. This is because of leptin resistance. So the leptin is high, but the leptin won't create its effect of satiety because of leptin resistance. It is similar to the insulin resistance. Okay. Now another interesting question. In SIADH, there is a lot of water retention because of excess ADH secretion. Okay, lot of water retention. Then why does the patients of SIADH doesn't present with jugular distension, pulmonary edema, or peripheral edema, or ascites, or any other features of volume overload? The simple answer is because of more water retention, H2O retention, there will be release of ANP and BNP and decrease aldosterone. So this will lead to natriuresis and euvolemia. Okay, so the water content is increasing, but at the same time it will stretch the atrial and ventricular myocardium, and it will release atrial natriuretic peptide and brain natriuretic peptide. It will also decrease the amount of aldosterone. That will cause excretion of the sodium and water, and it will result into euvolemia. Now this table, this chart and this table is very important. Like frequently questions are asked from this chart and this table. We will look at some of the important points here. Now we all know there are three kinds of congenital adrenal hyperplasia, that is 17 alpha hydroxylase, 20 hydroxylase and 11 beta hydroxylase. So this table is easy to remember. Let us see some points. Now, we all know that the steroid synthesis occurs in the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, but remember the enzyme desmolase, which is a rate limiting enzyme for steroid synthesis, it is present in mitochondria. It is not present in smooth endoplasmic reticulum. So if they ask you where is the rate limiting enzyme for steroid synthesis is present, then the answer will be mitochondria. Okay. Now etomidate is a general anesthetic agent. Etomidate inhibits 11 beta hydroxylase. So this is inhibited by etomidate. 11 beta hydroxylase. So we all know that the common side effect of etomidate is post-operative adrenal suppression. Okay, so it is never given to the patients of Addison's disease because it will cause adrenal suppression and it will cause adrenal insufficiency. Okay, so post-operative adrenal insufficiency. So it will be given to you as a clinical scenario, like a patient will undergo some surgical procedure. After the surgical procedure, the patient will develop hypotension, hypoglycemia, and then they will ask you which anesthetic agent might be given to this patient. So the answer will be etomidate. Metirapone is a chemical adrenolytic agent. So it might be used in patients of Cushing syndrome. The patients of Cushing syndrome have excess cortisol. So by giving metirapone, what will happen is it will inhibit this 11 beta hydroxylase. It will inhibit the cortisol production and it will cause chemical adrenolysis. Okay. Now same is syndrome of apparent mineralocorticoid excess. So in this syndrome, I have taken it here because glycyrrhenic acid, which is present in licorice, can cause this same or syndrome of apparent mineralocorticoid excess. Now, what will happen is on the mineralocorticoid receptor, if this is a kidney, right? Let's see, this is a kidney cell, and there is a mineralocorticoid receptor present here. Okay, so now both mineralocorticoid, that is aldosterone, as well as cortisol can act on this receptor and cause sodium and water retention. Now there is an enzyme associated with this receptor, that is 11 beta hydroxylase. Okay, so this 11 beta hydroxylase, what it will cause? It will cause degradation of cortisol to cortisone, and this cortisone is inactivate on this receptor. It can't work on this receptor. So in deficiency of 11 beta hydroxylase, there will be excess of cortisol and there will be excess of sodium and water retention. So the aldosterone levels might be normal or low, but the cortisol is excess, which will act on this aldosterone receptor and it will cause sodium and water retention because of 11 beta hydroxylase deficiency, and this can be caused by licorice because it contains glycyrrhenic acid. So glycyrrhenic acid will inhibit the enzyme for the necessary for the conversion of cortisol to cortisone. Okay. So I'm sorry, this is 11 beta hydroxy. This is 11 beta hydroxylase. This is 11 beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase. This is not 11 beta hydroxylase. 11 beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase. Okay, so in the deficiency of this enzyme because of licorice, there will be syndrome of apparent mineralocorticoid excess. All right, now 21 alpha hydroxylase, as we all know that when 21 alpha hydroxylase is blocked, so this pathway is blocked, there will be excess production of the androgens and there will be virilization of uh, girl child, and in case of male child there will be loss of sodium and water. So there will be salt wasting. So clinical phenotypes of 21 hydroxylase deficiency is dependent on the degree of 21 alpha hydroxylase deficiency. Okay, so there are three clinical subtypes. One is classic salt wasting, one is classic non-salt wasting, and one is non-classic delayed. So in classic salt wasting, it presents in the infancy. The degree of 21 alpha hydroxylase deficiency is severe. Here the degree is moderate and here the degree is mild. So in both the cases of classic salt wasting and classic non-salt wasting, girls present at birth with ambiguous genitalia. That is, the girls will present with ambiguous genitalia, like the features like clitoral enlargement, labioscotal fusion. Okay, while boys in classic salt wasting type will present at 1 to 6 weeks. 1 to 2 weeks with failure to thrive. dehydration, increased potassium, because we have seen that when aldosterone is less, potassium will be increased because of the inverse relationship. Okay, here in case of classic non-salt wasting, boys present at 2 to 4 years of age with signs of early virilization. In case of non-classic delayed, there will be sexual precocity or precocious puberty in school-going children. Or young woman can also present with acne, hirsutism, and menstrual irregularities. So you see this features acne, hirsutism, and menstrual irregularities. It is also present in one more disorder of females, which also presents in during adolescent age. So that is PCOS. Okay, so this is a close differential diagnosis of PCOS, DDX of PCOS. So in PCOS also there will be acne, there will be hirsutism, there will be menstrual irregularities. So these are the three types of 21 alpha hydroxylase deficiency. They might give you any of the clinical scenario. They might give you failure to thrive, or they might give you ambiguous genitalia. They might give you sexual precocity. Then they will ask you what will you do in this patient. So you will have to see the adrenal. You have to image the adrenal glands. You have to see if there is hyperplasia or not. Okay. Now, another concept is all growth factors act through receptor tyrosine kinase except, so there is one exception, that is transforming growth factor beta. It acts through the serine threonine kinase receptors. So all growth factors act through receptor tyrosine kinase except transforming growth factor beta, which acts through serine threonine kinase. Okay. So, what are the growth factors that act through the receptor tyrosine kinase? So, there are insulin like growth factor 1, there are fibroblast growth factor, platelet derived growth factor, and epithelial growth factor, right? Okay, so we also know that there are intracellular receptors in case of progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, cortisol, aldosterone, T3, T4, vitamin D. But out of this, which are having the intranuclear receptors? This is also asked, which hormones are having intranuclear receptor? So the answer is date. So date is vitamin D, vitamin A, thyroid hormones, and estrogen. These are having intracellular, in that also intranuclear receptor. Okay, rest are intracytoplasmic receptor. The receptors for testosterone, cortisol, aldosterone, they are intracytoplasmic, right? Now calcium and phosphate metabolism. If you see at it, there are two main hormones which you need to study. One is PTH and one is 25 hydroxy D3, that is calcitriol. Okay, now PTH will be stimulated by decreased calcium and increased phosphate. So decreased calcium as in conditions like vitamin D deficiency, or intake of calcium is low. Increased phosphate in conditions like CKD, chronic kidney disease. Okay, in that case PTH will be increased. So PTH will act on kidney and it will act on bone. By acting on bone, it will cause increase in calcium and phosphate in blood. By acting on kidney, it will cause increased calcium reabsorption from DCT. So this you need to remember. It causes increased calcium reabsorption from DCT, and it will increase phosphate excretions from PCT. So you can remember P for P, phosphate excretion from PCT, calcium reabsorption from DCT. It will also stimulate 1 alpha hydroxylase that will increase the conversion of 1 25 hydroxyvitamin D3 to 125 hydroxyvitamin D3, and this 125 hydroxyvitamin D3 will cause absorption of calcium and phosphate from the intestine. So remember, PTH directly doesn't cause calcium and phosphate reabsorption from intestine. Instead, it acts through vitamin D, and then it causes calcium and phosphate reabsorption from intestine. So PTH, if PTH will increase, it will cause increased calcium. So this increased calcium will cause features like recurrent kidney stones, recurrent nephrolithiasis. It might cause constipation. It might cause psychiatric symptoms like irritability, depression, anxiety, etc. Okay, so these are the symptoms of primary hyperparathyroidism. Now, if there is calcium deficiency, as I already discussed, if there is calcium deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, or increased phosphate due to renal failure, okay, kidney basically excrete phosphate, and if there is renal failure, there will be retention of the phosphate that will stimulate PTH release, and that will be called as secondary hyperparathyroidism. After after some time, after months of secondary hyperparathyroidism, there will be a parathyroid hyperplasia eventually. So there will be huge increase in parathyroid hormone, there will be increase in the calcium, and the phosphate will be raised because it is due to renal failure. Okay, so that is known as tertiary hyperparathyroidism. When the parathyroid gland becomes autonomous, it doesn't it no longer uh, uh, be in the control of the calcium. Otherwise, what will happen that when calcium will increase, it should feedback inhibit the parathyroid hormone. But in this case, in spite of an increased calcium, the parathyroid hormone won't be suppressed. Okay, so that is because of parathyroid hyperplasia. So that is known as tertiary hyperparathyroidism. Most of the cases of tertiary hyperparathyroidism are seen in chronic kidney disease. Okay, so generally they will give you lab findings like increase in PTH will be uh, there will be a huge increase in PTH, there will be increase in calcium, and there will be increase in phosphate. So don't confuse that why phosphate is increased even though the PTH is more. So the simple answer is phosphate is high because of renal failure. Okay. Now, decrease in serum magnesium will cause increase in increase in PTH level. But if the serum magnesium drops below a certain level, then it will cause decreased PTH. Okay, this is very important to remember, and it will cause hypocalcemia. So if the patient is having hypocalcemia and you are giving calcium treatment, the patient is not improving. Okay, that means you need to check the patient's magnesium level also, because the severe decrease in magnesium level can cause hypocalcemia by suppressing PTH secretion. The reason is simple, because some amount of magnesium is required for production and release of PTH. So this is all for today. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, and please share my video. Thank you so much.